Hi everyone, welcome back. If you're just joining us, we've had a really fabulous session in the past hour with our climate scientists, Mark and Sergio, and we just started to talk at the end of that session about the importance of relational and collaborative practice between the arts and the sciences. So it's really fitting that we end today's session with a panel on that very subject, relational practice. And I'm really delighted that Jamie, who is, of course, the co-organizer of this webinar, is going to be talking about his work, along with two colleagues from the University of Birmingham, Suzanne and Nilam Bari. And I'm always delighted to meet people who work at the same university that I've never actually met before, despite being in Birmingham for 13 years myself. So thank you for joining us. I know you're both based in Geography and Earth Sciences, and we're really looking forward to hearing about the work that you've been doing as well. And a special thanks to you, Suzanne, for joining us from Sao Paulo. I think you have a good case for being our furthest flung contributor today. So thank you for making the effort to work with the time difference and all of that. We really appreciate it. Okay, so I think I'm going to pick up on Jamie's strategy here and just let you introduce yourselves and say one or two sentences about who you are and why you think you're here and what you're going to be talking about. So, Jamie, could we kick off with you if we respect the order of the programme? It's over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Hello again. I'm a moving image artist. Which it means I do video art work mostly. So that's not documentary or filmmaking. It's more looped-based, architectural projections, installation-based work. I also work with augmented reality and motion capture and projection mapping. My background is in painting, fine arts practice, and I do still work with drawing and painting. And I see my work as kind of moving paintings. And in relation, and also tangent to that, I work in relational engaged practice. So I work with communities on co-production. Can you turn yourself up a bit? Let me just speak more loudly. It's probably the option I have. I'm going to be talking about my practice in engagement today, in relational practice, and how that relates to my feelings about biomimicry and connection to nature. So I'm also a director of a sustainability not-for-profit charity, New Leaf, which is part of Sustainability West Midlands, and we co-manage Queenswood Country Park and Bodenham Lake in Herefordshire with the Wildlife Trust, which is a big country park with an arboretum and many visitors. And also we run the Sustainable Future Centre there. So I work with sustainability people who aren't in the cultural sector, and even those my colleagues who are musicians and so on, sort of have not made that link between their music necessarily and their practice. So, or they are doing now, and it's quite interesting that we do live in these kind of spaces where we don't see the connection between even parts of ourselves, but certainly not with others and with other sectors and our environment as a whole. So this webinar has been supported, is a Future Sustainability Centre based project. It's in collaboration with the University of Birmingham, and we've got some Arts Council funding to help facilitate that. So talking about the practice of biomimicry and biophilia. So biophilia is love of nature, love of life, love of nature, and biomimicry is copying nature to make, really historically it's been to make better design, and more kind of better design in terms of bringing nature into building developments, into city planning, protecting parks, and also living cities, living walls, and landscape architecture. Maybe my collaborative practice is really essential in terms of the cross-pollination. So by collaborative practice, I mean working with members of the public, with communities, but also with other professionals, and keeping in the process-based approach. It's also sort of keeping the means of production open, keeping the pathway open. So not really having a fixed idea about the end product, but really the journey is the process, and the process makes you towards the end product. Obviously, you've got skill, you've got your practice and your ability to work in different media and the knowledge around that. But it's kind of, yeah, it's about let me just invite Lambury back on the screen. So really, my interest in nature and biomimicry came about really through, I was lucky enough to be invited at the age of 7 to work for the BBC, for BBC Radio Oxford's Nature Trail weekly programme as a co-presenter. My father was the producer of when local radio started in Oxfordshire. He started a programme called Nature Trail, and he had his 2 children every week go out with experts around the field. I think it related to an old Radio 4 programme called Nature Notebook, I think. But we actually went out into field recordings, we spoke to experts, and it was for people really, for lay people to understand nature. And I think that's really sort of grounded me. I've actually finished working for the BBC when I was 13, and I used to lament the fact that no, I'm actually not so, I'm really pleased I've been an artist all this time. So my background is in painting, and I took on fine art degree at Coventry, graduating in 1988, and so my work is focused on climate ecological crisis and the relationships and connection to nature. So I like to focus on that space, like we've been talking about it earlier on today, I think in different speakers, of that notion of what is the self and what is not the self, and that kind of space between and that connection to that paradox of us seeing us as separate from nature. So we're not only separate from ourselves, we're separate from nature, we're separate from each other. If you're a scientist, you're separate from being an artist. If you're an artist, you're separate from being a scientist. And we've got all these kind of siloed ways and all these compartmental kind of frameworks we've been kind of conditioned into. So I'm quite interested in expanding those spaces and like reconnecting right from people's own hearts and minds, where, you know, to places, their own kind of inner spaces, their own inner landscapes, their own kind of natural geography, if you like. So as part of that, I kind of wanted to invite you to think about this. I wanted to launch an engagement program for Presencing the Heating Skies like this afternoon now, a My Map program, and I wanted to ask you to just have a little think about this while for the rest of the day, or for a few minutes, or however long you want to. And it's a project I've just sort of launched with Crisis Skylight with Birmingham, with people at risk of homelessness. There's about sort of 4 to 6 vulnerable adults that I'm working with them, and they've started to do some drawings and some work on this. And also it's been put out to the Nick Grayson's connection with the Birmingham's Future Parks Accelerator program, with working with people connecting to parks right across the city, and connecting to the 4 sort of pillars of citizen involvement framework that Nick might well talk about tomorrow. Sustainable financial framework, that's not business as usual, and the health city framework, so well-being, environmental justice, so who and where, who is affected and where, and most by social and environmental injustice, if you like. And so I'm going to invite you to imagine, in this short time, to imagine yourself as part of a landscape. Imagine if the boundaries of yourself encompassed a space of land, or a tree, or a lake, or a field, or the interspace around you, or it could be like where you live. So I'm asking you to expand that boundary of your sense of self into a kind of geographical landscape place, and invite you to do maybe 2 portraits, do 2 self-portraits, one how you feel now, and one how you might feel in 10 years' time, and to draw your senses and to map yourself like a tube or a rail map or a canal map, where along that map in the landscape is your nose, where's your ears, where's your heart and mind, and how do your senses and feelings relate to your sense of well-being. And the idea of using the idea of the classical elements that we did that we explained in the last session, that we talked to that Dr. Payne interviewed to those climate scientists that you saw and others in BC3. How do they relate to the notion of fire, water, earth, air, and space? And like thinking of your senses, your sight, your feeling, your touch, your smell, your hearing, how do they feel? Whereabouts do you sense those feelings in that landscape? Ask yourself while you're doing that, what is your emergency? What affects you now, and what you think will affect you in 10 years' time? So in this work, you could use writing, drawing, collage, textiles, painting, photography, dancing, music, any medium, writing, anything you wanted to do, and not to worry how it looks like, and it's about how you feel. So basically, that's a brief that's been sort of done through the engagement with well, specifically with the Crisis Skylight people, the people at risk of homelessness, who fed back those ideas and the people working with them, and it comes through other sort of engagement. So that's something that I would that I'm going to be doing now with communities and feeding into this program, and do a kind of Mandela mapping exercise, so that this process just gets added to, and we have this whole sort of framework of individual self-portraits in relation to landscape, in relation to the environment, and the kind of what we consider to be not ourselves. And this works really with my sort of way that I work as a digital artist, with embodiment and moving. So I work a lot with dancers, not in live dance performances, but in filming dancers, using film and motion capture. I work with BCU, Birmingham City University. They have a course there to that have people who are training to be visual effects workers in the movie industry, and I managed to use their equipment there. And it's basically looking at that idea of movement as constant change, impermanence of fixed ideas, and who, like, that notion of movement away from who we think we are. I'm gonna have to just go call those two people back on the screen. Sorry, there is this crowdcast that can be a bit glitchy, it seems. So that's kind of how I kind of work. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to call those two people back onto the screen. Then I'll just do share my screen to show you a couple of examples. Sorry about this. Okay. Really, there should be someone else in doing admin while I'm doing my presentation, but there you go. Okay, so I'm just going to share something that some work that I've done that will kind of show what I'm talking about here. So let me just do that. Okay. Right, so this is a example of my work. So relational practice. So with the participants are actively involved in collaboration and co-production. We've heard that also spoken about today, co-production. And rather than the artwork being an encounter with a viewer and an object, which is quite a passive, I mean, nevertheless, like, can be quite moving and really important. There's also an idea that people can actually actively co-produce and co-create works, and that the artwork is really seen to be authored by more than one person. Obviously, I mean, through these counters, meaning it's a collective sort of meaning that's based on it, although people will have kind of ownership to their part of that. So this is an example of a project I did at Icon Gallery in Birmingham, well, with a young curators group there, and I got them to take their own portraits with green screen, and then to digitally alter their portraits and fill them in with digital collages of the area around Brindley Place, around the Icon, and that was done sort of digitally and also analogically, and that was projected in the gallery during an exhibition, a temporary projection as an exhibition. This one, like, is part. If anyone here saw Sally Payen's talk earlier on, this is I worked as a relational artist with Sally as the lead artist there at the MAC in Birmingham, and we did a whole series of workshops. We also worked with two craftivists from Birmingham, and we engaged with people to look at the archive that Sally got hold of, that worked with the Berkshire Reading, the Berkshire Records Office in Reading, and there was maybe about 20 or 30 boxes there of archive material from the Women's Peace Camp at Greenham, and we got them. We worked with some of the people there, and actually some of the protesters, former protesters, and worked out a series of engagement where they would then co-produce work. And this one down here, this one here on the bottom right, actually went to the youth club at Greenham. There was a youth club run there that was actually funded, even with all the cut downs in youth services, was funded by the Greenham Common Business Camp, Business Park, which is where the American camp used to be. And this must have been about 400 or 500 yards away from what was Bluegate. Probably quite a lot of you know about the Green Common Peace Camp in the 80s and 90s. It's one of the most important and influential peace camps, women-only peace camp, to protest against the site of American cruise-based missiles there in Berkshire, right next to Newbury. And these, none of these young people that I work with had heard of Green and Common Peace Camp, and they were they must have been born just after it finished, but it's not in the local knowledge. It's not in their vocabulary. It's not in their curriculum, and yet they live like so close to where it was just before they were born, which I found quite amazing. This is a project I did with University of Greenwich School of Design with the Activating Biophilic City workshop conference there, where there's a lot of people involved in landscape architecture and living wall specialists, living wall private sector partners and university researchers around. I asked them to think about, and this is with Nick Grayson, who's the Green Officer from Birmingham City Council, and I asked them to think about what were their light bulb moments when they were 13, 12, 13, 14. What was it, their connection to nature, to remember that and get to have a conversation, as it were, with their younger self, and to then sort of write down these ideas and put them into a spiral, and everyone shared those ideas. And that I was a bit nervous because obviously you're working with a lot of people who've thought all their lives, professional lives, about biomimicry in the built environment, but actually the feedback was fantastic and they hadn't actually really sort of thought about it in that way. And then finally, this is a project with the Green Man Festival I did, where I created a photo booth where people were invited to do their own photos, and then populate them with bits of like leaves and so on digitally, and they were printed out into these artworks here. So that's Green Man, Green Woman type artwork. So these are kind of just, as an artist, I'm kind of just experimenting really, just finding out ways of working with communities to try and to get them to reimagine their connection to nature, and each work moves on to the other. In my moving image, so the relational practice is in tandem with my own artwork practice, but they kind of feed each other, but they are slightly separate. So yeah,
Thank you very much, Jamie, and thank you for juggling the admin while you're actually trying to speak there as well. Just when we thought we got all our bases covered, the one thing we forgot to do was who would be hosting and be in charge of that button whilst you were speaking. So thank you for that, and thank you for another really fascinating talk. Again, I think that this will raise lots of questions, won't it? Particularly around, I'm thinking about generational awareness. You alluded to of some of these issues, particularly around green and common. So that's something no doubt we can come back to when we get on to the discussion. We'll need to let Neelam Bari back in as well if we're able to do that.
I'm on that.
Thank you. Great stuff. So let's move on then. Suzanne, it's over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you everybody for having me from São Paulo today, which was not such a long distance. So thanks to technology, I'm really happy to be here. Actually, I'm based in human geography, working with Professor Peter Kraftel. I'm currently on a Marie Curie Global Fellowship. I spent 2 months in Birmingham last year, and I'm in Brazil since October last year. So actually, my project is about working with young people in the periphery of São Paulo, age 12 to 18, on topics such as climate change, adaptation, and disaster risk reduction. And I think Jamie's presentation was an amazing introduction to my own work, because I'm really looking forward to the discussion, actually, because one of my ideas was like how to bring art into my own work. My background is also very mixed. I can't really put myself into any box. My PhD was more related to social sciences and environmental justice and community participation. My master's was in environmental science, always with a focus on health and urban sustainable development. And I already worked with young people in the periphery in Mexico using photography and drawings. And now in Brazil, I'm going to talk a bit about my work today. It's a participatory project with young people, and the idea is to really engage communities, especially young people, in sharing their experiences, how they presence climate change. And there's always this work around how to translate everyday experiences into something, we can use in academia, but also which is something communities can use and something we can also translate into public policies. So for me, as somebody who is not from the arts, I found this really great, because I'm, in my position as a more maybe rational scientist working more like, in geography, and here in Brazil, I'm in public health. I have to struggle sometimes of being creative, and at the same time, I think that's a huge opportunity. So I'm really looking forward, and I'm going to share a couple of examples of my work, which unfortunately due to COVID was interrupted. And maybe that's another thing I would love to discuss, like how to keep going with participatory work and arts-based approaches in this COVID, post-COVID, still COVID, society, new worlds, and the challenges we have, but maybe also opportunities, such as me being here today, which is already amazing. So I'm going to share my slides to give you a bit of an idea of what I'm actually doing. Oh, this worked better before. Now it's frozen as well. Oh no. Let's see if that's working. Yeah, I think the internet connection doesn't like to have too many people on at the same time, apparently, and sharing things. Are you able to see my screen already? No, but it's still loading. Oh, so sorry.
Suzanne, if you want to just email it to me, I'll see if
yeah, let me do this really quickly. Sorry everybody for this. I'm just hoping I'm not going to drop off now. I think it's the challenges we're facing nowadays with this. Everybody in the same. Sorry, this kind of just seemed to not respond anymore. I think you can still hear me though, right?
Yeah. Do we want to just go to Neil Ambury, and then if you email me, I'll see if I
yeah, just can't go back because it seems to be frozen here on the browser somehow.
Okay, don't worry, Suzanne. We can always pick up.
What I could do is just talk, but it would be nice to show some pictures. But
yeah, well, let's wait for the pictures to come through, and we'll move on to Neil Ambury, who.
Yeah, sorry.
No, it's all right. Don't worry. We'll come back to you. All of the sessions today have had technical glitches.
Yeah, it worked fine. I think just all people connecting at the same time and then sharing seems to be an overload.
We'll just work with it, so don't worry.
Thank you.
Okay, so Neil Ambury, I mean, you have a really interesting profile as academic, photographer, filmmaker. So I'm pinning a lot of hope on you to knit some of this together for us. So over to you.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Jamie. And thank you very much for inviting me for today's talk. So good afternoon to everybody who is attending today. I am currently a postdoctoral fellow in the School of Geography, Earth and Environmental Sciences. I'm contributing on the EU Horizon 2020 funded AgriMIC project in understanding migration governance in agriculture and rural changes across Europe, Asia, and Africa. Today, I'm going to share my research and also art engagement with climate hazards and migration based on my doctoral and postdoctoral work in Sundarbans in India. Jamie, can we go on the next slide, please? Yeah. So I'm an interdisciplinary researcher, and I keep oscillating and sometimes combining my training in sociology, environmental science, policy and management, and of course, filmmaking. And my research, therefore, is engaging in understanding the impacts of climate change and variation, the risk it possesses, risk it poses to people, and what hinders their ability to cope or strengthen their resilience in the geography they set in. Can we change the slide, please? So from 2011, I've been studying Sundarban area, which is widely known as a mangrove forest and are globally recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, a biosphere reserve, and a Ramsar site. So, and it is also it's also home to close to 5 million people, out of which 1.3 million people are directly dependent on subsistence activities such as fishing, crab hunting, collecting and also collecting non-timber forest produce, which we call honey or wood from the forest, along with diverse wildlife, which is spread across numerous islands. The iconic species which exists in this region is the Royal Bengal tiger, which I think many of you might have heard about. It is only one of the tiger species which can actually swim across saline waters. So it's very, very special. This combined with the exposure to changing climate, seasonal variability, hazards, cyclone, flooding, storms, and also soil and water salinization in the region, the people of the Sundarbans have been weather beaten several times in a year by several hazards. So one of the main tropical cyclones associated with the highest fatalities across the world, which we observe in the Bay of Bengal, which is in the Sundarban, making it one of the most perilous coastal areas in the Indian subcontinent. Actually, maybe many of you might have heard this year in May 2020, Cyclone Amphan actually battered the community when COVID-19 was playing on these islands. And many of the households were quietly limping towards some kind of recovery from the impacts of big cyclones like Ayla or Fani or Bulbul. And especially during these times of COVID, we have seen 1.5 million people were exposed to flooding. And that is a very, very serious issue. And I'm trying to understand this. Can we move to the next slide, please? Yeah. So I have conducted research in these areas. I have done in-depth interviews with over 500 households, which is around 2,823 individuals in these households from 5 islands. And I'm trying to understand the impacts on their lives and livelihoods. What was most important for me personally was to understand the perceptions of ecosystem changes and climate change, and how the local people look at it and how their lives are changing. Next slide, please. So as I discussed earlier, like most of the households are coming from very extremely poor settings in this region, and after hazard events have known to migrate to urban area, which in research terms we call adaptive migration. And most of them go to urban areas around India. So cities all over India in search of livelihoods to meet their household needs. I followed these households through my individual ESRC fellowship in 2019 to understand new lives in these cities and their well-being, and if they've adapted to new vulnerabilities, or have they been pushed further into any precarious situations, or are they coping, are they adjusted, or are they maladjusted to the new situations. And this is, can we move to the next slide, please? So I looked at the migrants in the city of Calcutta. And as this is the first major urban region that these households migrate into, I interviewed 81 households who come into the city from 2009 to 2019. This gave me a very good opportunity to understand, capture the various reasons for migration of these families. Why do they migrate? Why do they go? Where do they go? And how a hazard event pushes families and communities out of their places. And it is important for me to understand this from the point of urban resilience, where we have to prepare our cities, for internal displacement or migrants coming from climate change related events. This is so true with India, but it's also true with our coastal regions in UK, where Humber or, places like Cornwall, where people might be displaced with, erosion, of course. And what do we do about these people? So this has relevance with many of the around the world. So moving from my research engagement, I'll now talk about my art engagement. Jamie, the next slide, please. So I will talk briefly before showing you a film. Not a full film, it's just some extracts of a film that I made. And I've always been engaged in some form of art, be it painting, photography, or filmmaking. Specifically, while working in the Sundarbans, I was deeply impacted by the work when I stayed over 2.5 years with fishermen. So, actually, sorry, the subtitles weren't there, but what the lady tries to say is that I'm going to do catching the fish, and whatever little money, which is 10 pence or 20 pence, I'm going to use it for my household needs. And so this film talks about, it is a mixture of, sorry, can you hear me? Yeah. So it is a mixture of, photographs, audios, videos, expressions of people, the landscape, the emotions people have when they experience hazards, and things like this. So the next slide, please, Jamie. So this is, is it on next slide? I can't hear you.
I think Jamie is lining up.
Yeah.
He just left us momentarily.
It's just the last slide, so it's not much.
We really okay. But I mean, the images have been so striking. It would be nice to see the last slide that you have. But I think for the time being, perhaps just carry on talking if you're willing.
Yes, of course.
We'll get to see it.
Yes. So much of my entanglement, or whatever you call it, and my emotional expression, as you say, that, as I said earlier, it could not find that space in academia to put forth this, So it was necessary for me to, it was very natural progression that it went through art. There was no other way it could have come out, I think so. Because I think the pain of the people and their understanding, their expression, I think I couldn't have got it in any academic journal at all. Thank you, Jamie, for the last slide. So the last slide is actually, I have now from 2017 started painting something called a mangrove series. And I'm hoping through my work, I can create an emotional space to evoke empathy and a dialogue about changing climate and impacts of hazards on people's lives who have contributed very little to this happening, this, to how the nature is being there, and to bring forth their negotiations with nature. How do they adapt? How do they change? What do they want to do with it? And this expression of my experience in the field, my research findings, my commitment to the people with whom I have lived informs my research, informs my art, is where I can stop now. Thank you so much for listening to me.
Thank you so much for that presentation. As Sally has said in the comments, those photographs are absolutely beautiful, and that presentation is absolutely on the money of the kinds of issues we're talking about here, how to create empathy and foster understanding through the arts, and that's precisely what is going on there. So thank you very much, and no doubt there'll be questions about that. Can we get back to Suzanne? I know you've sent your presentation in a smaller file size.
Yeah, I hope
come through. So
I left out one slide. Let's see.
Yeah, so if you could just start, I'll get the slides up as soon as I can. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, so I'd like to share a bit about my work in Sao Paulo. Like I mentioned in the beginning, I'm working with young people in the periphery of Sao Paulo city. It's a place called Franco da Rocha, like half an hour away, and hopefully you will be able to see the pictures, because I brought some pictures just to get a bit of an impression of what it actually means, to presence climate change impacts nowadays, especially as a result of more frequent and intense weather events such as rain. We had a lot of big rain events. And just an example, like on my first day of field work, where I was supposed to go to the community, I couldn't go because it was raining, and I was already on the train. And then the social center that I work with, they called me and said, "No, go back because there's no way of getting here. Like the street turned into a river. There's just no way." And I couldn't really imagine, because I'm from Germany. There it rains a lot during winter time. In the UK it does as well, but it's different. You don't get these torrential rains as you get in Brazil. Hopefully we get the pictures just to see. I'm just going to explain a bit. Like there's the community I work in, it's in the periphery, and it's very hilly, very steep slopes. So one problem you have is landslides in the upper areas, and in the lower parts where the river is also flowing in the center, you obviously get the flooding. And another issue is, in terms of vulnerability, also the infrastructure. When we see housing, it's part of the community is irregular occupations, which didn't follow a fully authorized process. You also get a lot of buildings that are quite precarious in terms of structures of wood, and maybe here you can see a picture of the flooding in the houses, what it looks like. Maybe go to the next slide, just to get an idea where I'm working. So we are in Sao Paulo, where the red dot is on the left side. And the second map, the right one, is the dot, the red one is where the community is. So the lower part of the city is Sao Paulo. So it takes about half an hour. You can go there by train. It's not actually really far, but Brazil has these very different realities, right? You wouldn't imagine it's about like maybe 15 kilometers from here. But like being in Sao Paulo, I think it's sometimes hard to imagine, that these different realities exist, just outside our doorstep. Maybe next slide, please. So that's the pictures I wanted to show you. So the left one is a picture of Franco da Rocha seen from above. And you get the problem of landslides in the middle. So there's a problem, some of the houses just collapsed. So they told me about a house where just the kitchen dropped off, literally, because of landslides. So some of the houses are really built at the very edge. And the third picture is a picture of when the flooding happened, I think in February, that kids got rescued from the school bus that got stuck when the streets turned literally into a river. So it's actually something really visible, where we'd say, okay, well, it's something that makes climate change maybe a bit more tangible. But I think we always have to look at the frequency and the intensity, right, when we talk about climate change, not just the events in themselves. So you would probably think like, okay, the people who live in these communities probably they know and they talk about climate change and they're all really engaged, they're really aware this is happening and they're really aware they maybe live in a risk area, which would seem like, okay. But is it really the case? And like, how can we talk about these topics? Next slide. Because often, I mean, I work particularly with young people, and all of them experience climate change. So when I talk to some of them and say, what happens when it rains? They said, oh, I don't go to school because I can't get there, and the road gets flooded, and they have to walk further away, and like, oh, my shoes get wet, and my bag gets wet, and my books get wet. And so they do, experience, and they report on this, that they really live with these experiences on an everyday basis. But at the same time, when we come as academics or when policymakers come and try to talk to the community, it often is like this top-down approach and this blaming and pointing fingers and going, oh, but you don't really, do things in the right way, and you throw the rubbish in the river, and you don't, you build in places where you're not supposed to. So it's always also this blaming, and at the same time, there's this disconnection, from the topics. So when we come with our own discourse, I was thinking, how do I go and talk with young people about disaster risk and access to food and water and energy, which are other parts of my research, and how can I, really create a dialogue? And I can't go there and say, oh, so please tell me, like, how do you see yourself affected by climate change? And they would go like, huh? What do you want? So, and I think arts is really a nice way of engaging and making, research more participatory and really developing a joint language. What is this really where it's all about finding this common language, to talk about the issues we all look at from different angles and like really find this common ground. So next slide, please. So what was said before, like, is this emotional relationship with the environment. And I think I'm really glad I'm coming third, because I think the two first presentations were really a good introduction, I think. And it's really about capturing, the emotional engagement with the everyday experiences. I mean, we know about these young people who get organized and Fridays for Futures, and there's a lot of NGOs, where people are really active on an everyday basis. But what happens with those people who really live, and presence, the impact of climate change in everyday lives, but who don't really, maybe you're not so aware of it, or wouldn't really know what to share. And it also has to do a bit with maybe self-awareness and self-esteem. I think the young people I work with often go like, oh, but me, an expert, how? What do I have to tell about, my everyday life? What would I start? What do you want to know? But you're from the university. I'm just a person living here. Like, why are you asking me? Ask somebody else. I don't know anything about the topic. But of course I do know, because they live with this every day. So in my research, we really want to broaden also the notion of agency to capture this everyday experience. Next slide, please. So what we are doing is we engage in what we call youth participatory action research, which really takes youth as co-producers of knowledge based on their everyday protagonism and their everyday experiences, which involves youth actually also in creating the research and in setting the objective and setting the question, and really, not only seeing them as passive recipients or taking youth as, like a source of information, making interviews and leaving the community, but the idea is to really co-create the process of research with them to also correspond to their own needs, because obviously I have my proposal written and I have some questions I want to have answered, but at the same time, I think participatory research is really a flexible process where you can't really know what's happening, where it's going. So I don't have any conclusive answers on where it would have gone if COVID wouldn't have happened. But I will share a couple of my first experiences in the community. In the next slide, please. So what we try to do is to create an extension course through the University of São Paulo. So one of our ideas was to also motivate young people to participate by giving them a certificate. And we approached the community through the civil defense and different community social centers. So the picture is of one of the first times I met with the young people who were potentially going to participate in the project in a meeting with the social centers. We just had like an a meeting to get to know each other. And a big part of the project actually was trust building. So I just went and attended like some youth parties and just had like, I don't know, cookies and listened to music and try to get to know each other and try to kind of engage, you know, with also a different age group, because for them I'm old as well, and like I have no idea what, you know, 12-year-olds think about and 15-year-olds, and from a different reality, and like kind of breaking this researcher participant divide, you know, because in the idea is to be like not going in there and getting the knowledge and leaving, but really having this exchange and dialogical format. I don't know if you can see the lower picture is the youth center after the flooding. So basically the whole building gets flooded, and that's the picture you get the next day with all the mud on the floor. And they're actually rebuilding it in a different place now on a bit higher ground. Next slide, please. So what we did was, in the first step, we did like participatory mapping, which is, I think, a nice introduction, you know, in a way of getting kids or any age group in a way to just, you know, look at the neighborhood in a different way and think about, okay, which are the problems, environmental problems, or what does the place I live in, you know, my street, my community look like? And it's also nice to see like the proportions sometimes, how they draw it. We had some kids drawing like a big football field, which was basically the whole drawing. So it's quite interesting, and to see also how they get engaged. I mean, first is this, oh, but what are we going to draw? And it takes a lot of discussion before they actually start. But like once they get engaged, it's actually quite nice. Next slide, please, just to be brief, to have more time to talk. So the other activity we did to reconnect with the local community was community or youth-led community walks, where the youth had different roles. We got some being photographers, some working as note takers. We walked around, we interviewed people. There was some construction work going on at the river, so we made interviews with the construction workers. We actually found a community garden nobody knew about. So we just entered and we talked to the man who was running the garden, just, you know, to have him explain what he was doing and how everything was working. And it was a really nice experience, you know, for the young people to actually rediscover, you know, the place they live in, and they walked around every day, but like see it with different eyes and be like a bit more critical and write down questions they had on the way. And the next step was the slide I had to take out now so it wouldn't be too big, but I printed the pictures that the kids took during the walk, around 60 pictures. And then we tried to categorize pictures and like have a discussion around it, and write some post-its and like find common topics and have a bit of a, just, you know, kind of discussion and dialogue as a first step to then go into other activities. So, but then when the lockdown happened in Brazil, so that was the last thing I was able to do, which was really frustrating because it was going really well. Next slide, which is the last one, maybe also a bit of food for thought, like how to deal with digital exclusion, which is a big topic in my area because kids often don't have access to phones. They use their parents' phones. Often they don't really have access to, you know, good data for internet use because they just have like maybe prepaid phones. How do you do trust building when you're going online? You can't meet in person. So it's, and how can we maybe, you know, engage like in activities, maybe also arts-based things being online? Like one of the things I'm going to try now is do things through a WhatsApp group they have at the social center, but obviously it's not going to be as participatory, and I'm wondering how to make it a bit more fun. Instead of me just posting questions, what could I do, you know, with the kids instead? Maybe photography, or ask them to draw something. Then we have the question about resources, material. Yeah, I think for me it would be interesting to discuss a bit more like how to, you know, keep the arts-based approach going also in times of COVID. So yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. Again, that was really fascinating, and it draws together a number of the themes that all of your contributions are exploring, actually, and all of the papers that we've heard today: empathy, engagement, the importance of direct experience and participation. I think these are common threads that, you know, we've seen throughout this afternoon, and that no doubt we'll pick up tomorrow as well. So thank you for that, and hopefully you'll be able to pick up on this work beyond COVID. I know it must be really frustrating to have had it interrupted in this way. I mean, I've got questions, but I almost get the sense that you would want to talk to each other, and perhaps people out there in the audience will have questions for all three of you as well. So we've got sort of just under 10 minutes to start exploring those. Are there questions immediately? I mean, let's open it to the floor. or questions that you have for each other, perhaps. I mean, I think the two of you in geography, you know each other, don't you? And you work together a little bit, so you're kind of aware of each other. Jamie?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me it's really fascinating to listen to you both, and to see this approach from a geography perspective, and how that links, that kind of Mangrove approach links with the approach that I take, or that is taken by colleagues like myself, in arts practice, and the mapping. I think there's such a scope for a connection across those fields, really, with different ways of working, and a lot of the slides that you both showed made me kind of think of kind of similar projects I've been doing in different situations, perhaps with marginalised and disaffected groups in the rural West Midlands, for instance, or in the metropolitan area of Birmingham and the associated area. So yeah, there's just so many crossovers, really. And also the kind of that thing, did you find, what kind of pushback did you both get, from like larger stakeholders? Did you get pushback like from their agendas? Like I find, like I've just joined something called the Leominster Cultural Consortium in North Herefordshire, in the market town where I live, and they've been given some government funding. Well, I won't get into it, but yeah, there's a small amount of money for cultural projects, and I feel already kind of there's just like, well, let's do a project around sort of the medieval buildings, and I'm thinking, like, young people are just really not going to be into that. So yeah, what kind of pushback do you get?
Yeah, thank you, Jamie. I think first to start off is, for me, it was really nice to see the connections happening when I got the invitation. I was really happy, and it would be great to also like keep the dialogue going, just to see what work has been done, because I think it's, for me, a big challenge is sometimes being somebody not being from the arts and me trying to do something creative with the young people where I'm not the most creative person, I have to admit. So the question is like, would I, invite somebody external to help me with that, or what, which are the resources I can learn for myself, to bring into the community when I want to do some, more art-based, maybe, painting or whatever it is. I was thinking theater, music, how can I make this happen? So I think this was maybe a big challenge for me, just and also to expand my own horizon, like going a bit like away from this classical, maybe geographers stance, or public health in my case as well, like, what has been done, and like trying to be more open about this, and going first I would go like, oh, but how can I publish this? Maybe if, how can I describe to a journal, what people have been, putting down or have been expressing in a painting or something, I think it's interesting, like how there's still this clash sometimes, which shouldn't be there, because I think art really helps to express things that are sometimes hard to be expressed through words, I guess, makes it more visible. In terms of, well, I think we've had big support here in Brazil. I think everybody's really open, especially like, when somebody comes with new ideas and trying to bring some, fresh thoughts to the community and work with young people. We've had a lot of support from the civil defense and the social centers in themselves, and also the University of São Paulo. So I guess in this sense, I see more support than any resistance, to be honest.
Hi. To share what stakeholder backlash I have experienced. I think I have experienced extreme forms of backlash in the community itself, because I'm an outsider. I've been born and raised in Mumbai. So, and going to a rural setting and on the islands is somebody who is also learning their language, because I did not earlier speak their language. So I had to learn Bengali to be able to communicate with them. And from them, I'm an outsider. So I have experienced backlash, actually being thrown out of villages, or, shouted at or pushed or whatever. It's part of the parcel of work. I think that's fine. I take it as occupational hazard. But there's also political backlash, because climate change is political. And when you want to discuss things with people about their lives, about what matters to them, it is not always necessary that the politicians agree with what common people have to say about the things, how they want things to be, how you want to live where you want to live, for that matter. And I think in India, that is a messy job. It's coming from certain sections of society, certain aspects of culture, where you are, where you're from, how you speak, who you speak to. It all very, very matters in this context. And in climate change, world over is a political debate, right? I mean, it is dictated by politics. So locally, it is extremely messy. Even though locals are very welcoming, they understand it, they want change, they're looking forward for somebody to come and share their lives with, and express things. So when I went and said that, initially when I wanted to take photographs, very skeptical, because land is precious and deltas are, they are low-lying areas which are shifting, sinking. And when government wants to buy their land becomes a very, very expensive commodity. Why am I taking pictures of their land, right? Am I going to sell it? I mean, I'm an outsider, right? Am I going to sell it? Am I interested in buying? So there are many questions that come forward when you're, dealing with. There's also barriers of trust. You have to break them. There are ethics. Do you photograph people? How do you photograph people? Marginalized people around the world are portrayed as somebody who's crying, needy, helpless, blot. I don't think it's true. I think if you want to portray marginalized communities across the world, you have to have ethics and how you portray people. Climate change impacts the most vulnerable of these people in this world. And I think the responsibility lies with us, how we are going to speak about them, how we're going to show them. Can we not show an imagery which shows fragility, which shows vulnerability, but it does not show them badly? I think that is what I really think is missing. And I think art has the potential to change that narrative. Can we show the beauty of the landscapes? Can we show the beauty of the people? Can we show the beauty of lives? Even though destroyed, there's beauty in destruction. So I think we need to show that, because there's some or imagery. For example, if you show a polar bear to a child in India, doesn't really respond to a polar bear, Or if I show a tiger to a child in Europe, it's exotic, but it's not necessarily can relate to it. So you're not never going to understand the importance of saving that space or that animal or that region. And I think when you want to have empathy, let's bring a different kind of dialogue to table, where all stakeholders can understand the language of communication. I think the language of communication is really, really, really important. And I think that is where we are failing as researchers, as artists. If we cannot communicate in simple terms, get rid of all the jargons you have. What's resilience? What's adaptation? I'm a researcher, but I think it's really sad that we are not able to communicate because we are stuck in our four walls. I mean, not ready to translate these words. So I think the minute we are able to do that, we can get these stakeholders back on the same table to speak about it. And these are my views and my frustrations and also backlashes from which I've arrived to this conclusion, which I just shared with you.
I think it's really valid. I think
Thanks,
the points you mentioned about dialogue and trust building, and the language, I think is exactly the point that I found in my own work as well, that you can't go without building trust first. You want to go, as a researcher and get in there and start, get going. But I think trust building is maybe the most essential part of the project, which takes maybe the longest. And it really takes time, and the drawing of the maps, the first time I did it, it didn't work at all because I think it was too early. And I think we have just to sit down, engage and walk around, and slowly and take time and talk again, because it's issues, what would people answer, if you know that there's maybe irregular access to energy? Would they admit, because they'll go maybe she calls the police, maybe somebody comes and tears down my house if I admit that I live in a risk area, because people don't really trust, when I work with the civil defense, I said, people don't really like us because they always think we come and tear down their house and oblige them to leave, and instead of having this more preventive approach and saying, okay, let's learn about what's happening, what we can do. And And the last point is, the agency. I think really people have agency, and it's not just misery, and it's, it's not like, oh, the poor people, who are like victims. I think there's a lot of potential, there, like for them to transform their lives, and it's already going on. They're adapting in their own everyday ways, they're already living adaptive capacities in a way. Go with my terms, and I think the other thing is exactly language, when we talk with different groups, like making it clear and like, have them set, also the language they want, because it's for them actually, as well.
I completely agree.
I think I could, very selfishly pile in with other questions here, but actually there is a really powerful message there around the importance of art, communication and dialogue, engagement, policy making that wraps up our discussion so nicely today. So I think it would be almost indiscreet to try and ask anything further beyond that. So I'm going to suggest, Jamie, if you're in agreement, that we end on that really powerful note for today, with enormous thanks to everyone who's presented their work. And everyone who's joined us from the green room as well. One of the challenges of Crowdcast is that I can't see those of you who are in the green room, but I hope I'm not speaking to the void. I hope you're at least out there, and that you've enjoyed it as well. And we will see you for more of this tomorrow afternoon. So do get back and join us if you're able to find the time to do that. We'll very much look forward to welcoming you back. So thanks again, everyone, and we will see you again. Okay, thanks very much.
Apologies for the technical issues. I will be feeding that back to Crowdcast. It's the first time we've used it, but we'll see how it goes. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was really great. I really enjoyed it. And I hope we can stay and keep the discussion going. I think it was a nice starting point, hopefully only.
Perfect. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Andrew.
See you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.